Hi, Jackie. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Gareth.
The first question, as always, what is the hardest change that's happened to you in your life?
The hardest change that's happened in my life, apart from sort of personal changes like having children, for example, I think was the acquisition of Liberty Living by Unite in 2000. I'd built up the HR team from scratch across 17 years. Was part of the growth of Liberty Living from virtually its inception, not quite, I have to say, up until 2000, and having to make not just the wider business central services department redundant, but my own team. I think it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It was the in terms of change for all of those individuals and myself. It was kind of totally the end of an era, and then having to move into something totally different and the unknown. You know, I've never experienced anything like it, and I definitely don't ever want to experience anything like it again. However, there is always positive at the end. There is light at the end of the tunnel, because with change comes opportunity. And whilst in that moment, everything is very black. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. If you're familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve, you're going up and down and up and down. You're right down in that bottom part of that curve, and you can't see how to get out of it. You just have to tell yourself you'll get out the other side, and it will be better. And I use that experience myself to try to help other employees in some of my client businesses within PBSA and BTR through times of change, doing a lot of 2P at the moment. So, I think having had an experience of change that was, monumental, quite frankly, really, I hope, helps to provide a little bit of reassurance for those who are going through change.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I guess I'm interested in that whole journey from Liberty Living, obviously being purchased by Unite, and you saying about making, certainly the central services team, but your wider team,
Yeah,
your own team, redundant.
yeah.
How did you find the obviously being leading that, but also being part of it? I'm always interested in that, in terms of being the leader for the team, and I'm assuming a leader of, you were on senior management team
Yes,
for that, and how
yes,
you balanced your own feelings and your own situation against
yeah,
having to help your team through it.
yeah. Well, I I'm a Gemini. I guess I'm often two different people, and I really through that process felt like two different people. There was the part of me that was having to chair the consultation meetings with the employee representatives, sitting next to the directors from the acquirer, and quite often saying things that I honestly didn't believe. And it's not right to go into some of the detail around that, but it was such a difficult situation to sort of be that person there chairing that meeting, along with how they wanted things to be said and communicated, and then to come out of that meeting and then not just talk to the people who I'd just been sharing the meeting with, but then go back into our HR office and see my team who just looked at me as if to say, what was all that about? And I then changed to twin number two, as I call it, and we just talked it through. They realised that I was doing a job, and I think, in the role that I had, you know, ultimately I have to represent the company, and you know if I disagree with something, I will tell them, but ultimately I had a job to do, and that job was to ensure that this happened, however difficult that was. But I think it was a real, I can't think of the word now, but at the point that that was over, and we were heading into COVID as well, I think the fact that my team, we still continued to work together through sort of the closure of everything remotely, and having lots of silly online games and quizzes and all sorts of things, so we still sort of we stuck together. I think it was kind of strength in numbers, and they asked my advice on a personal level about things, and I advised them, and this is, I'm not advising you as your HR director, or even as a colleague, I'm advising you in my capacity and knowledge, as an HR professional, but also as a friend. This is what you could do. This is how I can help you, and this is what I suggest you might like to look at doing.
So how long was that sort of period from initially finding out that
well, for me,
being
it was awful long time, because as you might be aware, with these type of acquisitions, they take forever. So I mean, I think we learnt about it over a year before it actually happened. So it was in probably February 2019. It then went through, it was going through the CMA. It was announced in July 2019. And then it was completed in November 2019, and then the transition started. So the redundancy process started probably February 2020, just before COVID, January, February 2020. So we managed to get all of that done in person prior to COVID. COVID was end of March, wasn't it? And the difficult part as well was, sort of, we're all in the office on one day, having just got through this process, and waiting for the inevitable. People be given notice, so working notice. There were different staggered leave dates. Some people went at the end of March, some at the end of April, some end of May, some end of June, and the dregs went in September, as though everything was handing across. And we went in the office on one day and never came back. Yeah, that was the hardest thing as well, I think. We did come back. We kind of defied lockdown. All snuck in one day in about June, I think it was, because we had to clear our desks. We had to take, we kind of sort of met up. Started off sort of, social distancing. Definitely wasn't a party, by the way. Social distancing in our breakout area, and then at the end of something, we really don't care, so we all sat around and sort of had a giant picnic in the breakout area. I didn't get caught, but that was quite nice. But I mean, the process was very long, and for me as well, what was difficult about it was from the February 2019 through to July, I couldn't say a word, and they knew something was up because I was always in meetings, and we were all always huddled in a meeting. People used to walk around past the door and look through the little gaps, and sort of, what are they doing? What are they doing? And I couldn't say anything. So
did that take a toll on you?
Yes, it did. It did, yes. But it's a job. It's something you have to do. Go home, forget it, go back the next day, carry on. But yeah, it did definitely.
So,
yeah.
So you described working at Liberty as 17 of the best years of your working life. So
yeah.
On a positive note, why were the best years? What was so great about Liberty Living?
I think if you ask anybody, and we still say it, and you can't, you can never recreate something. I think people are trying to recreate little mini Liberty Livings around the country in various PBSA and BTR at the moment. But it was just, I don't know, under John Kenny's leadership, which was probably the best years, so sort of 10, 12 years with John Kenny and Charles Marshall at the top. We built that organization, we grew it, we acquired, we all together developed the values of the company, and everybody lived and breathed those values. And I think because we're all part of, the growth of the organization, everybody felt that it was like a giant family, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, but you still felt that we all knew we were part of something very, very special. And it's interesting because when I talk to people outside of Liberty, and actually I spoke to a gentleman who was working for Unite a couple of months ago. I was at a PBSA meeting, and we were just talking generally. He wasn't at Unite at the time that they acquired. Actually, he was, but he wasn't within an HR position. And he said, the thing that's really struck him is, how passionate the employees who transferred across were about Liberty Living. And he said he'd never come across anything like that, before. People wouldn't leave, they just wouldn't leave, which is great, but also it causes a bit of an issue for people who want to, move on in an organisation, because if your manager never leaves and their manager never leaves because they like it so much, you don't get any fresh blood in. So, but yeah, it was just a very, very special place, and I've never experienced anywhere like it, and I won't again. So,
so going back to the beginning of when you first got into PBSA, how did you get into it, and what have you seen sort of, what was it like even before, I was in PBSA for many years, but that was well before my time in the industry. What have you sort of seen change?
A lot. How did I get into PBSA? Well, totally by accident. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning, and that's one of my kind of comments at interview, whoever graduates or whatever says, I want to work in PBSA. I mean, you just didn't, and certainly not in the early 2000s. It was a very, very new sector. I was working as an HR manager in a law firm in London. I was made redundant. I was looking for job roles. There weren't many around at the time. I remember going to an agency in Leadenhall Market, going in there, and the recruiter said to me, I've got this job role, HR manager in student accommodation. And I looked and I thought, what? Why? What would I want to do that for? And I said, okay, all right. I hadn't got any other options at this point. No other interviews, or nothing that I wanted. So I went along for the interview. Met a lady called Kay Brando, who was probably the most eccentric American. She owned the company along with her partner Roger Boyland, that I'd ever met. She was a fascinating character, absolutely fascinating. Very, very difficult lady to work with. But I sat in the boardroom of 5 St James Square, which was the old Libyan embassy building, surrounded by small dogs. She had Bichon Frise and miniature poodles, which were called Gucci and Chanel and Coco. And so you have an image of this lady dripping in jewelry. And I was sort of sitting here, and it was quite late because she kept me waiting for an hour. And I was sort of sitting in this giant boardroom with silk-lined walls and posh curtains, and thinking, oh, what am I doing? And I'm not going to do the accent, but she said, we need somebody in HR. She said, we've got some real problems here. We run student accommodation, we've got some ground rents. And she said, I've got some real employee issues. There's people from accounts snorting coke in the toilets. And I just thought, pardon? So I went away thinking, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? Anyway, I then met the sort of operations director for the next stage, because I got through that interview having kicked a number of dogs under the boardroom table because they were snapping at my ankles when I was having my interview. It was about 7:30 at night, ankles bitten. Went through the next stage, and she said, I really want somebody to help me sort of, I don't know anything about HR. We need to really set up, there are problems. So with no other offers at the time, I joined 5th of March 2003, and stayed there for 17 years. So yeah, but how has it changed? So I think, how's it changed? It's a really good question. I think there's a lot of competitors now in the sector. So, when we started, it really was just, there was Unite, there was Liberty Living, well, they were called Prime Living at the time. There were very, very few. So it was a very new sector. There weren't many people there. We used to hire lots of people from the armed forces. So we had a very military, strong management team. And I guess we didn't really know what we were doing. We sort of fuddled around and thought we knew what we were doing, and tried to provide an experience for students which was a bit different, which was more than four walls and a roof, which I think we were one of the first people to coin that. It's interesting how many people now talk about, we're not just four walls and a roof. It's like, yeah, we started that one. And I think the opportunities that are there for people coming into this sector are probably quite, I think it was probably not unique, because I'm sure there are other areas, other companies, other sectors where you can join as a housekeeper and end up as the general manager. It must happen elsewhere, but certainly within Liberty Living, that's what happened. We always promoted from within. We made sure that we always put our people first. That's again why they wouldn't leave. And I think the sector has matured now hugely, obviously. But I see a lot of the problems. I work with quite a lot of different businesses across PBSA and BTR, and I see some of the problems that we had right at the beginning sort of still in there. I think, in terms of communication, which is really, really important, that lacks quite a lot in some businesses. There's an awful lot who are set up, and haven't really got an idea of where they're wanting to go. They know the end product from the student point of view, but I think from the staff of the communications and setting up sort of good lines of communication with the staff, it doesn't always happen. So that's where I come in and try to sort of help that, and sort of help from the employee side. But it's just a great, as the sector's matured, I think it's a really good, provides really good opportunities for people. So
you were described recently as the most famous HR professional in PBSA. Why do you think you were described as that?
I don't know. I was delighted by that. So that was from somebody I've never actually met before, and I'm doing quite a few tupies, and that was the first comment that she made to me. Oh, it's Jackie Hudson. You're the most famous HR person in PBSA, and I said, "Oh, thank you." I put that straight on LinkedIn, obviously. It's still quite a small industry, and I'm working with people now in clients that I've worked with not only in Liberty Living, but in the company they moved to, and the one they moved to after that, and perhaps where they are now, and people within BTR and PBSA are kind of moving around the sector, going up the ladder, and they keep coming across me. Because I in the last 3 years since I've been self-employed, I didn't start out thinking I'm going to work in PBSA. It just has kind of happened. It's organically grown, with people that I know who need some HR support because they're too small to have their own HR in-house team, coming to me and saying, "Oh, can you help us?" And that's got me known outside of my clients. I'm also part of the Pay Data PBSA HR group as well. So I now meet quite a lot of people within my area of expertise within the business. So don't know, but I'm going to stick to the title. I like that. Great.
You talked about John Kenny's leadership at Liberty being, a fantastic period of time.
Yeah.
Other than John, who do you think has been sort of the biggest influences on you in all your years in the sector?
There's a few. I think definitely there's a few actually. So first of all, John Kenny, in one of his sort of leadership speeches and general managers meetings, I can't remember where it was, introduced us to this guy called Ben Zander, who was a conductor of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And he's the author of a book called Art of the Possibility. And he said, always sit in the front row of your life. I haven't read much about him, but I will never ever forget some of what he said. And when people go into a meeting, or especially if it's like in a theatre style situation, and everybody goes to the back and sits in the back, and you can never fill up the front of a room, can you? I go right down the front, drag some poor person with me who's going, I don't want to sit at the front because they're going to ask me a question. It's like, sit in the front, sit in the front row of your life, be there, be present, be there for people, not just for yourself. Consider when you get up in the morning, bring your best self in. Doesn't matter if you've had a really bad night and, or you wake up feeling ill, put on your best self and come into work. And that's through Ben Zander and his teachings. Second one, probably my tutor at Portsmouth University, Dr. Sally Rumbles. She and I sat just after I'd finished my my master's in human resource management, and she said, I'm going to do a DBA next. And I looked at her and said, yeah, I was thinking about that as well. I said, how long does it take? She said, 7 or 8 years, part-time. I said, oh. having just spent 2 years of my life trying to do my master's. Anyway, she helped me through my master's. She was great. I now see has got her DBA, so I wish I'd done it now, because I would have been Dr. Jackie Hudson, but I'm not. I might do it one day. So she was very, very supportive, and definitely. And I think probably the last person is a lady called Helen Parker, who, when I joined the senior management team at Liberty Living, I felt a little bit like a fish out of water. Firstly, because I hadn't been brought up in sort of, in that environment as being part of that senior leadership team. Secondly, it was very male heavy, and I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so I've met a lady who runs or has she started up the British mentoring society. That's not the right name, but anyway, Institute of Mentoring, and we went on a couple of training courses for mentoring, and then we were looking at bringing mentoring into Liberty Living for the senior management team, actually. And I took the opportunity of having a mentor, and it sort of started off down one path, which was me trying to sort of feel that I had my place on the senior management team. Suffered hugely from imposter syndrome, so that was a big thing that I was trying to overcome. So that's what I started off wanting. But because it happened at the time that we then were going through the disposal and the sale of Liberty Living, actually it kind of kept changing, and she then helped me to make the decision to go on my own and to become self-employed. So I credit her hugely with where I am now, because without her, I don't think I would be here. So yeah.
Okay. And you talked a little bit there about, obviously, you're studying for your masters. Your dissertation was on commitment following organisational change.
Yes.
Which is obviously, we've touched on a little bit already about organisational change. So I imagine you chose that because obviously you had recent relevant experience. But talk to me a bit more about sort of the theme of that, and how you're applying what you wrote about there and what you learned in the clients that you're helping.
Absolutely, yeah. So this actually was a change that we'd had in Liberty. It was not a great change. It was in 2012, actually, 2011, I think, probably. And it was the first time we went through a restructure in Liberty Living. And I spent quite a lot of time interviewing employees, team members as part of my dissertation, but also to understand how the change had affected them. And then I learnt through my studies, that there are different types of commitment that the survivors of change reflected. So you have those who remain with the company in spite of change, because they actually want to. So that's probably one of the best types of commitment. It's called effective commitment. So they want to be there, so they stay. And then you've got something called normative commitment, and that is employees who remain with the company because they feel they should do. So they feel loyalty, maybe to the organization, maybe to a fellow employee. So, that's not bad as well. And then you've got the last one, which is called continuance commitment. And those are the employees who remain with the company because they have to, not because they want to. So they can't get another job, so they're stuck here. And understanding those three different types of commitment, actually, and the effect of trust and communication on survivors helped me to, and helps me now, to talk to people through times of change. So as I said, I'm doing probably about 3 TUPEs at the moment. So I'm working on the incoming side, so people are transferring across into my clients. And I talk again about the Kubler-Ross change curve. I said, you didn't sign up for this. I get that. You joined company A, and you're going to become an employee of company B. And some of them look like rabbits in the headlights. They don't understand what this TUPE thing is, because it's. And I did a consultation earlier this week, and I said to the person, I do apologise for human resources and the fact that we're just so process driven, and it's a process, and I'm sorry, but we recognize that you are people, and this is a change that you didn't want. So I think I use some of what I learned to try to help people through times of change like TUPE. And definitely communication is probably one of the biggest things. I think when we did our change at Liberty, communication wasn't great. I would say it wasn't. We learned from it, we said next time we do it, it's going to be different, and it was different. So I'd say to anybody, if you are planning a change, communicate with the team. They're not stupid, especially at PBSA. You'll have people wandering around the building. They're investors, aren't they? What are they looking at? I think some senior management think staff are a bit green. I don't know. It's like there's another set coming around and another set coming around, and they're asking questions. It's like, what's going on? And nobody tells them. There is no harm. I know certain things sometimes have to be confidential, but when it becomes so obvious that you don't have to wait until you've exchanged before you start the TUPE process. In fact, please start before, is what I would say to people. Please start before. So
do you think and I've been one of those managers leading TUPE processes both in and out of PBSA, and do you think we're giving enough training to those perhaps people in head of department roles, even up to operations director roles, on how to have those conversations? Because having been in that position, I always obviously had a trusted HR person next to me making sure I didn't say the wrong thing. But when you get those difficult conversations and you're trying to get across your message in a human way, albeit there's certain things you have to say, do you think there's enough of that? Because it happens quite often in PBSA and TUPEs and acquisitions.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, definitely not. Definitely not. And we realised that in Liberty Living, actually. And I think we were one of the first to bring in some real leadership and management training. And we started off with just not a generic course, but it didn't lead to any formal qualifications. And then we ended up sort of putting through an ILM, Institute of Leadership and Management qualifications, right the way from level 3 up to level 7, which is masters, through anybody in Liberty who wanted to do it. So we had housekeepers and administrators doing level 3, assistant managers and general managers doing level 5, general managers and regional ops managers, directors, other people within central function, senior people doing level 7. And the sort of, that theme of sort of helping and training people in being managers and leaders and understanding the difference as well between being a manager and a leader, really, really helped. So because, you go through quite a lot of, I guess, well-known models about, how people learn and how people communicate and all the different types of, the best way that somebody learns. Are they a kinesthetic learner? Are they, do they have to actually, physically do something? So all of that really helps. And I think, more formal training, and it's not something you can do in half a day. So, I have some clients asking me, oh, we'd like to do some management training. Can we do it, squeeze it in a couple of hours? It's like, no, you can't. You really can't. It doesn't. You're the tip of the iceberg. We ran these courses which went on, the shortest one, the level 3, was probably 10 months, and the level 7 was 18 months, and that involved workplace tasks, and you had to write, to say at level 7, you've got to write a mini thesis based on a workplace problem that you want to solve. So we also used it in order to try to solve problems within the workplace. So not only did it give the staff qualification, recognized qualification, it helped the managers be able to manage and lead their teams and understand how to do it properly. But it also solved some other problem that was needed some work on it. So yeah, absolutely, people don't spend enough time, definitely.
And going through that, some of these TUPE processes, and even before you even begin the formal TUPE process, can take quite some time, as we've already discussed. We talk about commitment, so there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly at the beginning. How would you advise people to maintain that commitment? Is it just regular communication, or is there other ways that during a period of uncertainty?
I think regular communication is probably the biggest thing you can do. You're never going to know at the end of the day what's going to happen to those people. If you're TUPEing them out, from your organization to somewhere else, they are, you can't control what's happening on the other side. So whilst you hope that they're going to an organization that's as good as the one, your organization, you don't know that, and that, I think, is quite difficult, actually. And you would hope that people would sort of sell to nice companies, but at the end of the day, they sell to the highest bidder. And if the highest bidder is not a particularly good employer, then it's not a lot you can do about that ultimately. But if you're the incoming, if they're coming into you, again, just spend time with people, give them the time that they want to digest the information. Say, I did one earlier this week, and the news clearly hit like a train going through it. The face was just, I felt for that person. I really felt for them. And it's like anything, it was just them words, we were just speaking at the employee. So I hope that the outgoing organizations spend time with that employee to sort of allay any fears, and then when the employee transfers over, which hopefully they do, because they have a choice ultimately, we'll spend time with them to make them feel part of the new organization, because again, as I said, it's not what you chose to join. You chose this company, and all of a sudden you're in that company, and maybe you've heard bad things about them. Maybe people who've had bad experiences, and that frightens people. So doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have a bad experience, but all of that fear that doesn't help. So just let them talk, communicate with them, keep them advised of what's going on. I think that's all you can really do, to be honest.
So another subject we briefly touched on, towards the end of your time with Liberty Living, was COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And I talk quite a lot about the pandemic on this podcast, mainly because I don't think any of us has really understood the effect it's had on people in any great depth, and we're still going through that change. So, what happened, to you sort of personally, but from a work point of view, going through that change during the pandemic, and what sort of the lasting effects do you think we've seen have been as a result of that huge period of change?
Yeah. I think that the most obvious one for everybody, and particularly for me, moving into a sort of a role as a self-employed HR consultant, is the ability to be able to do my job from anywhere. In fact, one client said to me, "I really don't mind where you are, but if you're on the beach, please don't turn your camera on." And I said, "Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't want to get sand in the laptop." I think the ability for roles, and it is a bit harder within PBSA and BTR because you've got those front customer facing roles where you can't work from home in the same way that perhaps the central services team or even general managers at times can spend some time at home. But I think the whole flexibility thing, going into an office a couple of days a week, that was absolutely unheard of. I mean, you went into the office, if you were not in a front facing role, every day to go into your little office, sit with the people that actually you probably didn't see them, you just in meetings all day, but never got any work done. But you had to travel to go and see people. During COVID, I was doing a redundancy process. And the first question was, can we do this over Teams? Can we do it over Zoom? Plus none of us knew what Teams or Zoom was either. So we were grappling with technology. So we've all come more tech savvy, definitely, over the last couple of years. But yeah, it's like, yes, you can. I mean, in an ideal world, perhaps you would actually be with that person, and hand out the tissues or whatever. But you can do stuff remotely. You can work remotely. You get a better work-life balance. You're not spending hours commuting. But I do think it is important to spend time as a team in person as well. So I think there's a good balance now for a lot of people, and it's moved that whole flexible working issue on by more years than I think we would we wouldn't be here now without COVID at all. We would still be all going into the office 5 days a week, stuck to our desks. It wouldn't be like it is now. I probably would have struggled with my building my business being totally remote, or I'd have to spend an awful lot of time traveling up and down the country. My clients were all over the place, so I wouldn't earn as much money because I'm traveling. I wouldn't get as much done. So I think the benefit is huge. But it also does bring problems because managers have to learn to manage remotely, and if they haven't had some of this sort of leadership and management training, it's going to be even harder. You could be sitting in your house and you've got your team all over the country. You never see them, especially if you don't have a physical office that anybody goes to. Onboarding people becomes quite difficult. Your processes have got to be very good. You've got to have your processes absolutely spot on, so that people don't feel that they're just dumped. And I think that's happening as well. So I think sort of employers need to spend more time sort of looking at their onboarding and making sure that their managers are trained in managing people remotely, because that's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot, and I think I'm reading in the press and online a lot about employers forcing employees back into offices.
Yeah.
Are we starting to see that in PBSA and BTR for central services teams, or is it still preferring that remote model?
It's a bit of a mixture. Some I'm seeing are definitely forcing in, but not on a 5-day week basis. So it is more flexible. Others still are taking the view of, well, actually, no, we'll continue on, a purely hybrid, especially if they haven't got an office. So I still have clients that don't actually have a physical base, so it's not an option. but it is moving, it is shifting more back to where we were, but as I say, but not with 5 days a week. But I'm seeing a mixture. So I think, so I was at the last PBSA meeting I was at, so that was looking at the industry as a whole, and the general consensus was we like our central people to be in the office 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it's settled, and I think that's probably where it will stay. Because I think people will fight if you try to get them into the office in London on a Friday.
Yes, I think it's definitely almost baked in now, isn't it? Certainly the Mondays and Fridays, unless there's
Oh,
particular
absolutely.
meetings.
You look at the railway station, the car park at the railway station. Today, I dropped my husband off. He's gone into his 1 day a week in London. Absolutely shock at the car park. Tomorrow, it'll be empty.
The other thing, and another thing you talked about briefly, was imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
and how you overcame that. Do we think that that's been, because it's become more widely talked about in the last few years,
Yeah.
and I often wonder whether that is related to this a little bit, to the more remote based work, or perhaps it's gone the other way. I'd like to get your thoughts on it, because operating remotely, there's less opportunities for feedback from
Yeah.
managers or colleagues, where you perhaps don't know whether you're, specifically if you're starting a new role, that's really difficult, depending on the onboarding program. But
Mm.
I do wonder if that more remote has led to this sort of, or maybe it's just we're talking about it. So I'd like to get your thoughts on whether that's had an effect on, is imposter syndrome being made worse or more prevalent by a
Mm.
more remote working style?
Mm. That's a very interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it in that way. I don't know. I've not seen anything that would lead me to believe that remote working itself is causing more prevalence of imposter syndrome. I think it's more about talking about it. I think, 3 years ago, even not, pre-COVID, it's not something I'd really come across a lot. Obviously, I'd studied and I'd seen, I'd sort of reading about imposter syndrome and be working with an HR, you kind of understand. But it was interesting because until I had my mentor, I hadn't actually even acknowledged it in myself at all. I had no idea that what I was going through was imposter syndrome. I hadn't actually put a label on it. And I think a lot more people are talking about it. So I think it's more out there. People are more aware of it, and you hear famous people talking about it. Who was it? I think it was Helen Mirren had said, she suffers from imposter syndrome. You think, what do you mean you're an actress? What do you mean you're? Surely not. Surely not. And yeah, it can't help with remote working, because I think, if you do suffer and you haven't got somebody to talk to in the same way, it's not the same when you're at home, working. Whilst you can talk to your colleagues on Zoom or Teams in meetings, you don't have that chat, do you? You don't have that sort of chat that you do when you go make coffee, or you're having lunch or whatever. So some of this stuff isn't going to come out, and I don't think, maybe we should encourage people to talk about it more, because I don't ever see it in an appraisal form. It's not something you just bring up. And I also wonder whether people, especially women, I think probably find it a bit of a negative thing to actually admit that I have imposter syndrome. I don't hear many men saying it. It's interesting. It is mainly women who come out with it. And I don't know if it's because women are made or generally feel that they're not good enough. But certainly understanding what it was for me, and then also being self-employed and realizing that actually my knowledge against somebody who is wanting me to help them is so more, I have so more knowledge than they do. It actually helps, because it's like, well, I could say anything you wouldn't actually know, but so and you get more thanks as well, interestingly, and people say, oh, thank you so much, I don't know what I'd do without you. It's like, oh, okay, so that helps it as well. That helps the imposter syndrome. But yeah, I don't think, as I say, I think the remote working isn't going to help people to talk about it because you're not
Yeah.
there in having that conversation in the moment. So
Okay. And we talked about falling into PBSA as most people do.
yeah,
To really take the sector to the next level, we obviously need the best and brightest people to come and work, and the very best people to come
yes.
and work in PBSA or BTR or any of the residential living sectors. So, how do you think we should go about trying to attract those people? Whether it's from school, from college, from leaving great
Mm,
universities.
mm,
How can we sell the industry and a career in the industry, which has obviously given you and I so
yeah,
much over the
yeah,
years? How, other than us talking about it on on
yes,
sessions like this,
yeah,
how do we get
yeah.
that out there to people to attract people to the sectors?
It's interesting, isn't it? I still think, the PBSA industry has a ready-made sweet set of individuals in their accommodation who are experiencing it from the student side, um, and opportunities like summer working and things like that. You can hand pick the people that the students that are in your accommodation that are working, that are good students, that are looking for some summer work, and get them interested in actually being on the other side. And through doing that, as we did that in Liberty Living a lot, we would always go to our students first. We wouldn't go to agencies and say, oh, we need half a dozen temps. We would look at students because they were there. A lot of them would be interested in summer work, and some of the most there's some people now at the top of the PBSA industry who started their life as a summer student helper on the front desk, and they're now head of operations for XYZ Company Limited. I'm not going to say them, but you know, um, and you've got that ready made. So I think we should harness that more. I think as a group of individuals, and we're trying through our sort of PBSA HR group to sort of share ideas, and maybe that will help a little bit. I think it almost takes quite a few sort of groups of like-minded individuals who work within PBSA to sort of perhaps brainstorm and try to move it forward. But you've got a ready-made whole, every year you get another whole batch of students that you can use, and you can open the world of PBSA as a career to them, and they see it from the other side, and then they're your best advocates because they've lived it. They know that they like the accommodation, so that's tick the box. And then actually they see the other side, so they become very good salespeople for you.
I think that's great advice. I think it's often easier to go to an agency or look elsewhere and to other sectors when like you say we've got the best and the brightest living in our
They're all
buildings
there.
already.
They're all there. Yeah. Why would you not? Why would you not? So seems a bit silly, but yeah.
And on a couple of previous sessions of the podcast, I've talked about retention quite a bit and how that's retention is particularly low in certain operators and in the
Mm,
sectors, probably lower than it has been for a long time, if
yeah.
ever.
Yes.
Um, why do you think we're seeing that? Is that an industry problem or is that a wider problem? And secondly, if I can ask a double-barreled question, uh, what advice would you give to people that are struggling to retain their great people?
Yeah. I think it's not just an industry problem. I think it is broader than just PBSA, because with the cost of living, people are looking to they need to earn more money, so they're moving more. But within PBSA, where I see the biggest problems is where it is due to uh, a poor recruitment process, not using not using people like me to help them. Not going through a proper interview process, not onboarding them properly, and then ignoring them. Not going through sort of a review process, and all that's missing. And people sink or swim, or just vote with their feet. So some swim and succeed, but it starts with the recruitment ultimately. So and I think recruiters generally at the lower end, so if you're looking at sort of the CSA, customer service assistant side, recruiters now aren't interested in that role because it doesn't bring enough money in for them. The roles are paying just over minimum wage, to be honest, in most PBSA. So the recruiters aren't interested. So the company puts an ad on Indeed or wherever, brings somebody in, hires them. There's no process. I'm not seeing process. I'm not seeing, and I know HR criticize for process because we're too process driven. But if you ask some sensible interview questions, have another meeting with somebody. Don't make a decision once you've spoken with somebody for half an hour and then wonder why it all goes wrong. Have you missold? And I'm dealing with a situation at the moment where I said I do wonder whether the person actually knew what it was they were getting into when they joined you, because do they feel they've been missold? When they don't turn up the next day, why is that? What's gone wrong? Something's gone very wrong there. And it all goes back right at the beginning to the recruitment process. So if you don't get your recruitment right, you're not going to get the right people in. Even if you do get the right people in and you ignore them and you don't train them and you don't give them some basic targets to achieve in their first 3 months and 6 months, and they're going to leave. And if you don't pay them well enough as well, they'll also leave. So it's not just about pay, because pay is a very, very short term incentive. You give somebody a big pay rise and they'll be really happy for a couple of months until they get used to it. So it's other things as well. What else do you do that either sets you apart from your competitors or makes people feel that actually you value them as an employee? So do you have a sort of employee of the month? One of my clients is sort of doing that and giving the person who wins that month's employee of the month or whatever an extra day's holiday. So they're recognizing them as well. So I think that helps. Looking at your benefits, things like that, making sure that you communicate with people and you onboard them properly. So I think all helps for retention, and certainly say in Liberty Living we couldn't lose them predominantly. They wouldn't go, they wouldn't move, it was stuck like glue, because we had regular meetings from sort of all company meetings, annual conferences, which were great fun. I mean, they were legendary, through to your individual one-on-ones, and we made sure that sort of life cycle, that employee life cycle bit was worked. But we recruited the right people in the first instance as well.
I guess the question remains, the sector's been around a long time now. How are we still getting this wrong? We've got multi-billion-pound industry, and we're still not, and I'm not saying every industry is perfect by any means, but how are we still getting this wrong? Not on recruiting, onboarding people.
I don't know. I do wonder. My HR colleagues, what are they doing out there? A lot of the smaller operators don't have an in-house HR team, so they're struggling on their own, or they then suddenly find me, which is why I'm now becoming sort of famous or infamous. I'm not quite sure which. I suppose the danger on that is there'll be lots of little clones of each other if I'm not careful. But I think human resources generally could do more to try to be more effective in helping, and sort of not just being proactive, not sort of reactive to something. So I kind of blame some of my HR colleagues in a way. I'm sure if they, in theory, they should know what they're doing and they should be able to help. But whether they're not being listened to, because again, this isn't just a PBSA thing. HR generally are often at the bottom of the pile. I was reading a CIPD, one of my CIPD magazines last week, and it said, why are there very few chief executives have come up through the HR field, because HR are seen as sort of, process driven people who sit behind closed doors and don't communicate. Most chief executives, managing directors have come from the operations side, not from the HR side, or finance. And I think HR itself is a problem, and I think that then potentially doesn't help the PBSA and or any other sector to get it right, because they're not being proactive. They're just reacting because perhaps they're not loved enough. I mean, nobody loves HR, let's face it. I'm hopeful. But you see all those cartoons, oh, shut up, HR's here, and we've heard it all before, but we're seen as kind of harbingers of doom, I think. So I try to be different.
I like to see it as, or certainly did when I was working within companies, as the people that stopped us from getting sued quite often.
Well, yes, that is true, yes. But then we're also the people that stop you doing what you're wanting, because again, that brings me to, I was having that conversation yesterday. It's like, well, ultimately it's your decision. However, I wouldn't make that decision without doing X or considering X. All I'm doing is advising you, but that can be seen as blocking, because your operations managers say, I just want to get rid of this person, I just want to get rid of them. Surely we can get rid of them. Yes, but if you just do it properly, then you'll find you're less likely to be up in front of the employment tribunal. By the way, have you ever been in front of the employment tribunal? They're not nice things. So I just try to give them options and say, we can do that, I can make that happen. However, you need to be aware of the consequences should it go wrong, because I can't absolutely promise that I can keep you out of court, but I'll do my best.
And so obviously you started up on your own, and it seems to be going really well. Have you looked back at all? Is this a great move for you, setting up on your own?
It's interesting. Yes, I do look back. I guess I miss being part of a team. I'm part of lots of little teams, I don't see the bigger picture most of the time. I deal with sort of, it's more reactive. It's more difficult to be proactive as a consultant, because the client's paying, and they want this problem sorted, but maybe they don't want the solution to stop the problem happening again, although you do try to make sure that happens. And ultimately I do whatever is asked of me, whether that's sort of fairly monotonous stuff or really interesting stuff. It's a total mixture. So I miss being, say, part of a bigger organization, or a bigger team. So working with the operations team and the health and safety team, and sort of being part of a bigger solution. But will I go back? I don't think so. I do enjoy what I do. I have learned that I probably spent an awful lot of time at work not actually working, because when you work, and you only charge for when you're actually working, the hours in a day, you go to the end of the day, it's like, I've only billed 4 hours. What have I been doing? Well, I went to get my lunch, I did all of this stuff. So actually, you have to work harder to earn 7 hours money.
I think everybody could learn there, whether they're self-employed or work for someone, putting a value on the hours of the day. I think certainly
it's quite scary, actually. I'll sit looking at my computer at the end of the day, I think, oh, I've been so busy, and it's like, I've clocked up sort of 4 3/4 hours. What have I been doing? I haven't left this chair. But in physical, what I've actually, or can charge somebody is half of my time sitting here. Maybe I give too much away, I don't know. It's quite funny, but I wouldn't go back. No, I wouldn't go back.
Okay. So we've come to the time for the quick fire round questions. So if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
I would take the pressure off of children. Actually, I've got 2 children. One's doing GCSEs. She's got her last one tomorrow. one's doing A levels. The pressure that children have at school to do, first of all, SATs in primary school, then GCSEs, as my daughter's doing, then A levels, as my son's doing. I got the worst A levels in the world. I left school with, I wasn't good. I wasn't a good learner when I was 16, 17, 18. So, I left school, went to work in the typing pool in Barclays Bank. They did exist at the time, with crap qualifications. I was a very late learner. So I think I would take the pressure off children to have to perform, because what they're doing now, they're told is going to, mold the rest of their life. That's actually not true. If it was true for me, I wouldn't be here now.
Okay. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to change their direction but doesn't know where to start?
I would suggest that they find a mentor. For me, that was a big change for me. She was such a huge supporter. I then, with my newfound love of studying, did 2 qualifications, and I did an advanced qualification in mentoring from the Institute of Business Mentors. And I would say get a mentor, because I hadn't really thought about it before, and it was almost, as I say, pushed on me. So I thought, I don't need a mentor. What can somebody tell me that I don't know already? That's a very ridiculous thought I had, but I'd say get a mentor. Really helps, because she helped me to change my direction very successfully.
Okay. And what's going to be your next big change?
Ultimately, I want to spend more time in Spain. I want to learn Spanish. We've had a property in Spain for the last 12 years. And I'd like to be able to sort of go and take my laptop on the beach and work kind of even more remotely. I would like to spend a bit more time in Spain, ultimately.
Work from anywhere. I think that's the goal.
Work from anywhere. Yes, I want to experience, living in a different country. So I've never done that, and I really would like to do that. So as soon as my kids have left school and all of that, and then that'll be me trotting off.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And lastly, if you were to recommend a guest for me to speak to on the podcast, who would it be?
I was thinking about that. I knew you'd ask me that question. So I've probably got 2 people. I mean, I would definitely have to recommend John Kenny, as he was such an influence on me. The other person, actually, I'd recommend is somebody I've been involved with as a client more recently, and that's Stephen McCarthy, who's moved from PBSA into BTR. And I'm impressed with what he's doing now within the BTR sector. So I think he could have quite an interesting. Actually, John Kenny's done the same. He's gone from PBSA to BTR as well. So either of those 2. But,
great.
Yeah.
We'll certainly tag them in the posts, and hopefully get some episodes. Maybe John can tell us a bit more about the Liberty years as well.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
In a future episode. Jackie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. It's I think one thing I'm really conscious of when we're doing these is giving people practical advice when they listen in, and I think certainly today's conversation has given people practical advice, whether they're going through change, through a TUPE process, or just trying to retain or recruit their best people. And whether you're the most famous HR professional in PBSA, certainly one of the most knowledgeable. So I think people would do well to pick the phone up to you. So thanks very much for today.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Gareth. I really enjoyed it. It was great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.